It was a moment that felt almost impossible to reconcile with the image the world had known for decades. The man sitting quietly by the ocean that morning was not the unshakable figure audiences remembered from the big screen. There was no tuxedo, no cinematic lighting, no triumphant music swelling in the background. Just the soft crash of waves and a man staring into the distance, carrying memories that few people truly understood. 4 generations of moviegoers, Pierce Brosnan represented the ultimate symbol of confidence and control. When he stepped into the role of James Bond in the 1990s, he embodied everything audiences expected from the legendary spy. Sophisticated, fearless, unbreakable. On screen, he saved the world with calm precision in films like GoldenEye and Die Another Day. Bullets flew, villains fell, and Bond always walked away untouched. But real life does not follow a script. Behind the charm, the fame, and the effortless smile was a man who would endure heartbreak that even the darkest Hollywood drama might hesitate to write. Loss that came suddenly, loss that came slowly, and loss that returned when he least expected it. For Pierce Brosnan, tragedy was not a single chapter in his story. It was a shadow that appeared again and again throughout his life. In 1991, the woman he loved deeply, Cassandra Harris, lost her battle with ovarian cancer. The grief was devastating, but what made it even more painful was the history behind it. Cassandra's mother had died from the same illness years earlier, and the tragedy would later strike the family once more in a way almost too cruel to believe. For a man the world saw as unbreakable, these moments revealed a reality few people ever witnessed. A father, a husband, and a man quietly navigating grief while the cameras kept rolling and the expectations of fame never stopped. Today, at 72, Pierce Brosnan remains one of the most respected actors of his generation. Yet behind the legacy, the awards, and the iconic roles lies a deeply human story about love, loss, and resilience. Because the truth about Pierce Brosnan is far more complex than the character who made him famous. And the real story, the one that unfolded away from the spotlight, may be far more heartbreaking than anything Hollywood could ever create. Long before the world knew him as the suave face of James Bond, the life of Pierce Brosnan began in circumstances that were far from glamorous. He was born on May 16, 1953, in the small town of Drogheda, in County Louth, Ireland. It was a quiet place with narrow streets, modest homes, and a community where everyone seemed to know each other. But for Pierce, the sense of belonging that many children feel growing up in a small town never truly existed. When he was still an infant, his father, Thomas Brosnan, walked out of the family and disappeared from his life. Pierce would grow up with almost no memory of the man. For years, the absence lingered like a silent question mark. Other children had fathers who attended school events, fixed things around the house, or simply existed as a constant presence. Pierce had none of that. His mother, Mae Smith, loved him deeply, but survival demanded sacrifice. Ireland in the 1950s was a difficult place for a single mother trying to build a future. Eventually, she made the painful decision to leave for London in search of work as a nurse. That choice changed Pierce's childhood forever. As a result, he spent much of his early life being raised by relatives. For a time, he lived with his grandparents. When they passed away, he moved between different family members, including an aunt and uncle. Home became a shifting concept rather than a stable place. He often spoke later about the feeling of being passed from household to household, never quite certain where he truly belonged. Loneliness became a quiet companion. School life did little to soften that feeling. Pierce attended a Christian Brothers school, an environment known for its strict discipline. The atmosphere could be harsh, and like many children in that system during the era, he experienced an education shaped more by authority and rigidity than encouragement. But in the middle of that difficult upbringing, something unexpected happened. Pierce discovered art. Drawing and visual creativity gave him a sense of control over a world that often felt unstable. For the first time, He had a way to express himself without needing to explain the complicated emotions he carried as a child. Teachers noticed his talent, and for a while, it seemed possible that his future might lie in painting rather than acting. At the age of 11, another major turning point arrived. After years apart, Pierce finally moved to London to reunite with his mother. The transition was dramatic. Ireland had been quiet and familiar. London in the 1960s was loud, crowded, and bursting with cultural change. Yet the move opened doors that had never existed before. During his teenage years, he attended the Elliott School in Putney, where he was exposed to new forms of art and performance. One day, almost by accident, he wandered into a theater workshop. What he saw there changed the direction of his life. Actors were transforming themselves into entirely different people on stage. They could become heroes, villains, lovers, or dreamers. For someone who had grown up feeling invisible and displaced, the idea was electrifying. Acting was not just performance. It was transformation. Soon after, Pierce began studying acting seriously. He eventually trained at the Drama Centre London, one of the most demanding acting schools in the country. The program was intense, often pushing students to emotional and physical extremes, but Pierce thrived in the challenge. For the first time in his life, he felt as though he had found a place where he truly belonged. Yet the emotional scars of his early years never completely disappeared. The experience of abandonment, instability, and longing for family would remain with him long after he became famous. Those early struggles shaped the resilience that audiences would later admire. But they also planted the emotional depth that would define his life far beyond the screen. Because the man who would eventually become one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces was still carrying the quiet memories of a lonely Irish boy searching for his place in the world. And as his career began to rise, those memories would follow him into a future that held both extraordinary success and unimaginable heartbreak. By the late 1970s, the young Irish actor who had once struggled to find a sense of belonging was beginning to carve out a place for himself in the world of performance. For Pierce Brosnan, acting was no longer just an escape from a difficult childhood. It had become a calling. After graduating from the Drama Centre London, Brosnan spent several years performing on stage. Theater was where many serious actors of the time sharpened their craft, and the environment demanded discipline, emotional range, and stamina. Night after night, he stood under stage lights, learning how to hold the attention of a room full of strangers. But the real breakthrough came in the early 1980s. In 1982, Brosnan landed the lead role in the television series Remington Steele. The show followed a witty private detective agency where Brosnan's character posed as the mysterious Remington Steele, a fictional boss invented to attract clients. The concept was clever, blending detective drama with romantic comedy. Audiences immediately noticed him. He had a rare screen presence. Tall, composed, and effortlessly charming, Brosnan seemed to belong in front of camera. His performance carried a mixture of intelligence and humor that made the character memorable. Over the next several seasons, the show gained popularity both in the United States and internationally. Hollywood had discovered him. During this period, industry executives began to see something familiar in Brosnan. His elegance, his voice, and the calm authority he projected reminded many of the legendary British spy who had dominated cinema for decades. The character was, of course, James Bond. Ironically, Brosnan was almost cast as Bond in the mid-1980s. Producers were impressed with him and seriously considered giving him the role after Roger Moore stepped down from the franchise. But television contracts complicated the situation. Because of his obligations to Remington Steele, the opportunity slipped away. For many actors, losing such a role could have been the end of a dream. But Brosnan kept moving forward. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, he appeared in a series of films and television projects, gradually building his reputation as a reliable leading man. He worked steadily, refining his style and learning the rhythms of the film industry. Then, in the early 1990s, the opportunity returned. The Bond franchise had entered a period of uncertainty after the final performance of Timothy Dalton. Producers were searching for a new face who could revive the iconic character for a new generation of audiences. This time, the choice became clear. In 1994, Pierce Brosnan was officially announced as the next James Bond. It was a role he had narrowly missed nearly a decade earlier, and now it had come back to him at exactly the right moment. When he appeared in the 1995 film GoldenEye, the impact was immediate. The film revitalized the Bond franchise and introduced the character to a new era after the end of the Cold War. Brosnan's version of Bond balanced sophistication with modern intensity, appealing both to longtime fans and younger audiences. The success was enormous. GoldenEye became one of the most successful entries in the series, and Brosnan quickly became one of the most recognizable actors in the world. Over the next several years, he would continue the role in films like Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, and Die Another Day. To the public, it looked like the perfect Hollywood story. A talented actor rises from modest beginnings, earns global fame, and becomes the face of one of cinema's most legendary characters. But behind the success, there were private battles unfolding that few people could see. Even as Brosnan's career was reaching heights most actors could only dream of, tragedy had already begun to shape his personal life in ways that would leave lasting scars. And the pain that awaited him would prove far more devastating than any fictional danger James Bond had ever faced. By the mid-1990s, Pierce Brosnan had become one of the most recognizable faces in global cinema. His portrayal of James Bond arrived at a critical moment for the franchise, and the impact was immediate. When GoldenEye premiered in 1995, it did more than simply introduce a new actor in the role. It revived a legendary series that had been dormant for several years. The Cold War had ended, audiences were changing, and many questioned whether the Bond character still belonged in the modern world. Brosnan answered that question the moment he appeared on screen. He brought together several elements that had defined the character over decades. There was the elegance associated with Sean Connery, the wit that audiences remembered from Roger Moore, and a more contemporary edge that reflected the uncertainties of the new geopolitical landscape. GoldenEye became a massive success both critically and commercially. It grossed more than $300 million worldwide and reintroduced Bond to a younger generation. Suddenly, Pierce Brosnan was not just a television star or a respected actor. He had become a face of one of the most enduring icons in film history. The success continued with Tomorrow Never Dies, which explored the growing influence of global media and information warfare. Then came The World Is Not Enough, a film that attempted to give the famous spy a deeper emotional dimension. By the time Die Another Day was released, Brosnan had firmly established himself as one of the defining Bonds of his era. The film celebrated the 40th anniversary of the franchise and performed strongly at the global box office. Around the world, audiences associated his face with sophistication, danger, and cinematic spectacle. Off-screen, his career expanded beyond the Bond universe. Brosnan appeared in films such as The Thomas Crown Affair, where he played a wealthy art thief opposite Rene Russo. The film highlighted a different side of his acting style, combining charisma with subtle vulnerability. He also took on projects that reflected personal interests, including producing films through his own production company. These ventures demonstrated that Brosnan was not only interested in acting, but also in shaping stories behind the camera. To the outside world, everything appeared nearly perfect. Wealth, global fame, critical recognition, and a career tied to one of the most iconic roles in film history. But while the public saw a life filled with glamour and success, the reality unfolding behind the scenes was far more complicated. Long before Brosnan became James Bond, a devastating loss had already altered the course of his personal life. And even as he stood at the absolute height of fame, the emotional weight of that tragedy remained with him. Because the greatest battles in Pierce Brosnan's life were never fought on screen. They were fought quietly, far away from cameras in moments when the applause faded and the world stopped watching. While the world admired the elegance and composure of Pierce Brosnan, The most defining moments of his life were unfolding far away from the red carpets and film premieres that surrounded his career. Long before he became James Bond, Brosnan had already experienced a devastating loss that would shape the rest of his life. In the late 1970s, while still building his acting career in London, he met Australian actress Cassandra Harris. Harris had already begun establishing herself in the film industry, and the connection between them was immediate. Their relationship quickly grew into something deeply meaningful. They married in 1980. Cassandra had 2 children from a previous marriage, Charlotte and Christopher, and Brosnan embraced the role of stepfather with remarkable devotion. In time, he legally adopted both children, giving them his surname and raising them as his own. Together, they also welcomed a son, Sean Brosnan, completing what appeared to be a loving and stable family. But tragedy soon arrived. In 1987, Cassandra Harris was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. At first, there was hope. Treatments began, and the family faced the illness with determination. Brosnan continued working, balancing his career with the responsibility of supporting his wife through the long and exhausting battle. For 4 years, the disease slowly took its toll. In December 1991, Cassandra Harris passed away at the age of 43. Brosnan was only 38 years old at the time. The loss shattered him. In later interviews, he spoke openly about the profound grief he experienced during those years. He once described sitting beside her hospital bed, holding her hand as the illness progressed, powerless to stop what was happening. For a man who would later portray an indestructible spy on screen, the reality of that moment revealed a vulnerability few people ever saw. Yet the story did not end there. Years later, the same illness would strike the family again in a way that seemed almost unbearably cruel. In 2013, Charlotte Brosnan, the daughter Pierce had adopted and raised since childhood, also died from ovarian cancer at the age of 41. The parallels were heartbreaking. 2 generations of the same family, both taken by the same disease. For Brosnan, the loss reopened wounds that had never truly healed. In interviews, he described Charlotte as a bright, compassionate woman who had inherited her mother's warmth and strength. Watching her fight the same illness that had claimed Cassandra decades earlier brought back memories he had tried for years to carry quietly. Despite the pain, Brosnan rarely allowed the public to see the full weight of his grief. His image remained composed, dignified, and calm. But behind that calm exterior was a man who had endured a level of personal tragedy that few people would ever associate with a Hollywood icon. The world knew him as James Bond, the man who survived every danger imaginable. But in real life, there were losses that even James Bond could never defeat. The years that followed these tragedies forced Pierce Brosnan to confront a reality far removed from the heroic narratives that had defined his public image. On screen, he had spent years portraying a man who always regained control, who could navigate danger with cold precision. But grief does not follow the logic of a film script. It lingers, changes shape, and often returns when least expected. After the death of Cassandra Harris in 1991, Brosnan entered a period of profound mourning. At the time, his career was still building momentum, and the demands of the entertainment industry did not pause for personal loss. Interviews, film roles, and professional commitments continued, even as his private life had been permanently altered. Yet those difficult years also reshaped his understanding of what truly mattered. In the mid-1990s, as his career reached international heights with the success of the Bond films, Brosnan gradually rebuilt parts of his personal life. In 1994, he met American journalist and television presenter Keely Shea Smith. Their meeting took place during a trip to Mexico, and the connection between them quickly grew into a deep relationship. For Brosnan, the relationship represented something he had not believed possible for a long time after Cassandra's death: the chance to experience love again without erasing the memory of the past. The couple married in 2001 in Ireland, in a ceremony that reflected Brosnan's enduring connection to his homeland. Together, they built a life centered on family, eventually raising 2 sons, Dylan and Pierce Brosnan. Their home life, often kept deliberately private, became a source of stability after years defined by both success and sorrow. At the same time, Brosnan began channeling his experiences into causes that extended beyond acting. The loss of Cassandra and later Charlotte heightened his awareness of cancer research and the devastating impact the disease has on families. Over the years, he has supported various charities and health initiatives related to cancer awareness and treatment. The tragedy involving Charlotte in 2013, however, brought a renewed wave of grief. Losing a daughter is a pain few parents can imagine, and for Brosnan it carried the haunting echo of Cassandra's earlier struggle. Friends and colleagues who knew him during that period described a man who faced the loss with quiet strength but unmistakable sorrow. Even so, he continued working, appearing in a wide range of film and television projects. Roles in films like Mamma Mia and its sequel introduced him to a new generation of audiences who saw a different side of his personality, one that was warm, humorous, and disarmingly human. Off-screen, he gradually stepped into a stage of life where reflection replaced ambition as the dominant theme. He spoke more openly about family, about resilience, and about the importance of appreciating time with loved ones. By the time he reached his 70s, Brosnan had already lived through experiences that reshaped his understanding of fame, loss, and endurance. The glamorous image of Hollywood star remained part of his public identity, but those who looked closer could see something deeper. The man behind the legend had survived heartbreak that no screenplay could soften. And the legacy he was building was no longer defined only by the roles he played, but by the strength he showed when the spotlight faded. Today, when people hear the name Pierce Brosnan, many still picture the iconic silhouette of James Bond walking confidently across the screen. The tuxedo, the calm voice, the sense of effortless control. For an entire generation of moviegoers, Brosnan defined what the legendary spy looked like in a modern era. Yet the legacy he leaves behind extends far beyond the films. During his years portraying Bond, Brosnan helped carry one of cinema's most famous franchises through a period of reinvention. Films such as GoldenEye and Tomorrow Never Dies did more than succeed at the box office. They introduced the character to a new audience and proved that the mythology of the British secret agent could survive dramatic cultural changes. But when historians of film look back at Brosnan's career, they often notice something else as well. Behind the polished public image was a man who never allowed fame to erase his sense of perspective. The tragedies he endured changed the way he spoke about life, family, and time itself. In interviews across the years, Brosnan repeatedly returned to the same theme, gratitude. He often reflected on how fragile life can be, particularly after losing both his first wife, Cassandra Harris, and later his daughter Charlotte, to the same devastating illness. These losses did not disappear with time. Instead, they became part of the emotional foundation that shaped how he viewed the world. Friends and collaborators frequently describe Brosnan as a man who carries a quiet depth beneath his public charm. While many Hollywood careers are defined solely by success or scandal, his story carries a more complicated emotional weight. It is a story about survival. Over the decades, he continued acting, producing films, and supporting charitable causes, including environmental and health initiatives. His work outside the screen revealed a person deeply aware of the responsibilities that come with influence and visibility. At the same time, his family remained at the center of his life. His marriage to Keely Shea Smith became one of the most enduring relationships in the entertainment industry. Together, they built a life intentionally quieter than the Hollywood spotlight might suggest, often choosing time with their children over the constant cycle of public appearances. For audiences, the image of Pierce Brosnan may always be connected to adventure and cinematic glamour. But the deeper story is one of resilience in the face of grief and the quiet strength required to keep moving forward when life delivers unimaginable loss. In the end, the most remarkable thing about Pierce Brosnan may not be the characters he portrayed. It may be the way he endured the chapters of life that no audience ever saw. Because while movies eventually fade and roles pass from one actor to the next, The question his story leaves behind is far more human. When life tests us with loss we never expected, what truly defines a person is not the victories the world applauds,